This is You've Already Been Hacked, recorded on 5 December 2020. This week, we're starting off with CISA warning us about foreign threat actors targeting U.S. think tanks. The FBI and the DHS's CISA warned of state-sponsored hacking groups targeting the United States think tank organizations in a joint advisory this past week. Advanced persistent threat actors are regularly directing their attacks on such organizations and individuals associated with them, who can have an important role in shaping U.S. policy and international affairs, according to both federal agencies. State-backed hackers have used a multitude of infiltration vectors in their attacks, including spear phishing, focused on both corporate and personal accounts via email and third-party messaging services, as well as the exploitation of vulnerable web-facing devices and remote connections. CISA and the FBI also advised organizations and individuals in international affairs and national security sectors to adopt a heightened state of awareness. Quote, nation-state APT actors have sought access to U.S. think tank organizations which employ former U.S. government personnel who continue to engage with current U.S. government officials on political, domestic, foreign, and economic policies as a means to collect sensitive U.S. government information, bypassing the need to target U.S. government networks directly, unquote, according to the FBI warning. In the statement, the FBI continued with, the reasoning behind this targeted approach is twofold. U.S. government networks tend to be more secure and more difficult to access, and mitigation efforts within the U.S. government networks have historically been effective. Even after successfully removing APTs from the compromised networks of think tank organizations, they have been able to shortly re-infiltrate them and resume harvesting and exfiltrating sensitive information until their malicious activity was once again detected and blocked, according to the FBI. In another warning from the FBI, scammers are exploiting email forwarding rules. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has issued a notification to warn organizations of scammers setting up auto-forwarding email rules to facilitate business email compromise schemes, or BEC schemes. Cybercriminals are exploiting the mass shift to telework during the COVID-19 pandemic to conduct malicious operations, including BEC scams that are more likely to succeed due to the targeting of an email rule forwarding vulnerability. Of note, BEC losses in 2019 surpassed $1.7 billion, according to the FBI this past February. The FBI stated the attackers are able to conceal their activity through auto-forwarding rules implemented on victims' web-based email clients, but which often do not sync with the desktop client, thus hiding the malicious rules from security administrators. Using social engineering and stolen credentials, the attackers gain access to victim email accounts and engage in communication with specific employees to redirect pending or future money transfers to attacker-controlled accounts. By creating auto-forwarding rules, the scammers prevent the victim from identifying fraudulent communication and ensure the success of their malicious activity. If the web and desktop mail clients are not actively synced, administrators may not have visibility into fraudulent activity. The United States Supreme Court is hearing arguments in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act case. The Supreme Court this past week indicated serious reservations about the ambiguity and scope of the nation's only major cybersecurity law, hinting it may narrow the law's applicability to avoid criminalizing such acts as checking social media at work. During arguments in a case involving a Georgia police officer convicted of violating the 1986 Computer Fraud and Abuse Act by accessing a license plate database, the justices pushed a Justice Department lawyer to explain how a ruling in the government's favor wouldn't open the door to prosecutions of innocuous behavior. Those could include browsing Instagram on a work computer or performing public-spirited security research to test the system for vulnerabilities. As the first CFAA challenge to reach the High Court, the Van Buren case generated amicus briefs from a wide range of technology, privacy, and cybersecurity experts, most of them on Van Buren's side. A group of cybersecurity experts described the CAFA as a sword hanging over the head of researchers who probe computers for weaknesses with the goal of helping their owners fix the flaws. Multiple justices had varying questions for the government lawyers with regards to what the text or pictures and access to those on a work computer would mean, what the violations could be for any innocuous behavior as such, and what does authorization mean when a person is granted authorization to the database. Is it blanket, or should it be for the specific purpose in which that authorization was granted at that time? Delaware County, Pennsylvania has paid $500,000 in ransom after their systems were hit by the Doppelpayer ransomware last weekend. This past week, Delaware County disclosed that they had taken portions of their computer network offline after discovering that their network was compromised. Quote, "The County of Delaware recently discovered a disruption to portions of its computer network. We commenced an immediate investigation that included taking certain systems offline and are working with computer forensic specialists to determine the nature and scope of the event. We are working diligently to restore the functionality of our systems," unquote, according to a Delaware County alert. The county stated that the Bureau of Electronics and the county's Emergency Services Department were not affected and are on different networks than the hacked systems. Local media stated that the ransomware operators had access to networks containing police reports, payroll, purchasing, and other databases. And as part of the attack, the threat actors demanded $500,000 ransom to receive the decryptor. Doppelpayer derives its name from BitPayer, which shares a large portion of code but has been improved over time with a threaded encryption process for faster operation. Doppelpayer is known to steal unencrypted files while performing their attacks. It is not known if this was done in the attack against Delaware County. An article at Bleeping Computer stated that the ransomware gang advised Delaware County to change all of their passwords and modify their Windows domain controller to include safeguards from the Mimikatz program. Mimikatz is an open source application commonly used by ransomware gangs to harvest Windows domain credentials on a compromised network. Once the threat actors gain access to a Windows domain administrator password, they deploy their ransomware on the network and encrypt devices. Other victims attacked by Doppelpayer in the past include Compal, Pemex, the city of Torrance, California, Newcastle University, Hall County in Georgia, Banijay Group SAS, and the Brunete Telecom. Phishing campaigns are targeting the COVID cold chain. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, hackers and scammers have focused extraordinary attention on it, whether for espionage or for grift. Now, as pharmaceutical companies prepare to ship long-awaited vaccines, a new round of sophisticated phishing attacks is focused on the complex supply chain that will get them to the people in need. Two of the leading COVID-19 vaccine candidates by Pfizer and Moderna have been submitted to the FDA for emergency authorization. The agency is scheduled to evaluate Pfizer's application on 10 December and Moderna's 1 week later. UK regulators approved Pfizer's vaccine on Wednesday, which means the next challenge for both vaccines is transporting them. They must be kept at a refrigerated temperature, -4 degrees Fahrenheit for Moderna and 94 degrees below for Pfizer, requiring a network of specialists known as the cold chain. This past week, security researchers at IBM released findings that a campaign has for months targeted a significant number of those companies across 6 different countries. The campaign seems to have focused on companies and organizations associated with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance's cold chain equipment optimization platform, an effort to streamline and strengthen the cold chain. The only target IBM identified by name was the European Commission's Directorate General for Taxation and Customs Union, which, among other things, determines tax relief associated with transporting vaccines across borders. Seemingly, any part of the cold chain was within bounds for the attackers. Other targets mentioned by IBM include manufacturers of solar panels, which might power trucks carrying the vaccine to more remote locations, and a German website developer whose clients include pharmaceutical, biotech, and container transport companies. The attackers sent emails purported to be from Haier Biomedical, a Chinese company that advertises itself as, quote, the world's only complete cold chain provider, unquote, under the guise of routine requests for quotations. The email contained HTML attachments that asked the recipients to enter their credentials, which the hackers could then harvest to infiltrate the targeted company. IBM went on to state it doesn't know if any of the attacks were successful or what the ultimate objective of the campaign might be. Adding to the challenge is that cold chain companies often aren't as well equipped to defend themselves as multinational drug companies or finance firms. In mid-November, cold storage firm Americold suffered an attack of ransomware. We spoke about this earlier last month. Unrelated to the newly detailed phishing campaign, however. This attack against Americold knocked some of its operations offline. IBM stated that, quote, we have strong concern that as this cold chain becomes global critical infrastructure, the individual organizations involved may not be prepared with the security posture that's really needed to protect them. The logistics around the cold chain are hard enough to get it right as it is. Hackers might further complicate things or could be in a position to upend them. And that is a distressing possibility for the United States and the rest of the world as it enters a critical phase of its pandemic response. If you thought that Trickbot was gone, think again. Researchers at Huntress Labs have uncovered what they described as a really clever use of a Windows batch scripting by the authors of Trickbot to try and sneak the latest version of their malware past automated detection tools. The technique takes advantage of the way the Windows command line interpreter reads and interprets data that is typed on the command line. What the authors of Trickbot have done is use a batch script to break up their payload into numerous small chunks, and then use the command line interpreter to rebuild the original payload. This technique isn't specific to Trickbot. In fact, any other code or malware sample can do this within Windows batch scripting. But this is the first time that Huntress Labs has observed a threat actor using this exact obfuscation technique. Though PowerShell and other command line tools are now available for Windows, Command EXE remains the default command line interpreter for the operating system, as it has for decades. The technology makes a good target for attackers because it provides an interactive interface that they can use to execute commands, run malicious programs, delete files, and carry out a variety of other functions. The troubling part of all this is that to an automated scanner, the multiple smaller chunks would not appear like any malicious string, so the malware could be able to evade detection. This obfuscation loader primarily evades signature-based detection, which hunts for known bad strings or characters that can indicate malicious activity. For organizations, the main takeaway here is that automated tools don't guarantee protection against all malware threats. In this case, the obfuscation that the authors of Trickbot employed would have been relatively easy to spot for a human analyst, but a scanner might not see any evidence of malicious or bad commands and let that malware slip past. And finally, just a reminder, macOS is not safe from malware. A newly discovered form of malware is targeting Apple macOS users in a campaign that researchers say is tied to a nation-state-backed hacking operation. The campaign has been detailed by a cybersecurity analyst at Trend Micro, who linked it to Ocean Lotus, also known as APT32. a hacking group that is thought to have links to the Vietnamese government. Ocean Lotus is known to target foreign organizations working in Vietnam, including media research and construction. And while the motivation for this isn't fully understood, the aim is thought to be to use espionage to aid Vietnamese-owned companies. The macOS backdoor provides the attackers with a window into the compromised machine, enabling them to snoop on and steal confidential information and sensitive business documents. Researchers have linked it to Ocean Lotus because of the simple similarities in code and behavior of the malware, compared with samples used in previous campaigns by the group. The attackers began with phishing emails that attempted to encourage victims to run a zip file disguised as a Word document. It evades detection from antivirus scanners by using special characters deep inside a series of zip folders. The attack could potentially give itself away if users are paying attention because when the malicious file is run, a Microsoft Word document does not appear. However, at this stage, an initial payload is already working on the machine, and it changes access permissions in order to load a second stage payload and then prompts the installation of a third stage payload, which downloads the backdoor onto the system. By installing the malware across different stages like this, Ocean Lotus aims to evade detection. Like older versions of the malware, this attack aims to collect information and creates a backdoor allowing hackers to snoop on and download files, as well as upload additional malicious software to the system if required. It's thought that the malware is still actively being developed. It's recommended that organizations apply security patches and other updates to software and operating systems so malware like this isn't able to take advantage of known vulnerabilities that can be protected against. That's all for the news this week. I'm your professor of cyber risk. We'll talk again soon.